Welcome to UrbanWise podcast. So imagine if your city's traffic lights, the bus schedules, even the actual road layouts were designed based entirely on the grudge you personally hold against a specific pothole on 4th Street.
Right, which sounds completely ridiculous, I know.
Yeah, it sounds crazy. But what if city planners could actually account for your personal quirks, like your caffeine habits or your stubborn refusal to take the highway during rush hour because you just hate the merge?
Oh, I hate the merge too. It's the worst.
See? Exactly. And that is exactly what we're getting into today. We're looking at a really fascinating article by Melike Şenkal. It's titled Urban Mobility Forecasting Reimagined. Can LLM-based agents transform transportation planning?
It's a great piece. Really groundbreaking stuff.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore this massive paradigm shift in urban planning. Because for decades, the people designing your streets have, they've relied on cold mathematical equations to figure out where you are going.
Yeah, highly structured, very rigid equations.
Right. And now they are looking at just tossing a lot of that math right out the window. They want to use AI, specifically large language models, to simulate the wonderfully complex and frankly completely irrational ways you actually move around your city.
It truly is a fundamental shift in perspective. Because when we take a step back, cities aren't just concrete, asphalt, and steel. They just aren't.
No, definitely not.
They are living, breathing reflections of human behavior. Every single trip you take, whether it's your grueling Tuesday morning commute or just a leisurely Saturday stroll to a park or even a spontaneous midnight run for ice cream, all of that is shaped by a tangled web of personal decisions.
Right. Totally unpredictable human stuff.
Exactly. So the goal of our discussion today is to look at this research and figure out if these large language models can actually help us model cities, not just as mechanical systems, but as actual lived experiences.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can truly appreciate how AI is about to, totally change the game, we really need to understand how cities currently predict your morning commute.
Yeah, the old way of doing things.
Right, what the source material calls the math era of urban planning. For a very long time, the absolute backbone of transportation planning has been this framework known as the four-step model.
The classic four-step.
Yeah, and this is a highly aggregate, really old-school approach. Basically, planners look at city zones and break human movement down into 4 sequential steps. You've got trip generation, trip distribution, mode choice, and route assignment.
The crucial keyword there, though, is aggregate. The four-step model does not care about you as an individual at all.
It just sees numbers.
Exactly. It looks at a whole chunk of a city and calculates, okay, based on the population density and the commercial zoning here, this square mile will generate, say, 10,000 trips to that commercial square mile over there.
Right.
It relies on this generalized data that assumes highly stable, completely predictable behavior patterns across massive groups of people.
Which, it makes me think of plumbing. It's like they're treating citizens as water flowing through pipes.
That is a perfect analogy, actually.
Yeah, because the model assumes we are all just a fluid volume trying to find the path of least resistance from point A to point B. The math calculates the capacity of the pipe, the road, and predicts how the water will flow. It assumes everyone behaves in a perfectly logical way.
But we aren't water.
Exactly. Water doesn't remember a traffic jam from yesterday. Water doesn't, take the scenic route because the leaves are changing color. We don't flow logically. So to fix this, planners tried to upgrade the system with something called agent-based models, or ABMs.
Right, the first big attempt to make it personal.
Yeah. So instead of aggregate zones, an ABM actually simulates individual agents representing people or households. You give these agents predefined mathematical rules to follow, and you see how their individual actions collectively shape the city's traffic.
What's fascinating here is where that seemingly logical upgrade completely falls apart.
Oh yeah, it really did.
Because, agent-based models were a huge leap toward behavioral realism, but they have a fatal flaw. They rely on rigid mathematical rules, and human beings are constrained by something called bounded rationality.
Bounded rationality. I love that term. It sounds like a polite way of a scientist saying we're all just a little bit unhinged.
It is. It is the formal academic way of saying human decisions are never perfectly rational, not even close.
Right.
Bounded rationality means your choices are heavily influenced by your deeply ingrained habits, your skewed spatial perceptions, and the highly incomplete information you have at any given moment.
Like maybe I take a specific route to work, Not because it's mathematically the fastest, but because it avoids a tricky left turn that just makes me nervous.
Exactly. And an agent-based model really struggles to capture that feeling. Because ABMs rely on fixed, predefined rules, planners have to feed them massive, incredibly granular data sets just to calibrate them.
Just to teach the math how to be scared of a left turn.
Right. They spend months trying to force rigid mathematical equations to mimic irrational human quirks. And even with all that effort, they still fail to capture our true nature.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if humans aren't perfectly logical, rule-following robots, how on earth do we model them?
We need a totally new tool.
Right. We obviously need a system that can actually think and adapt rather than just calculate. Enter large language models, or LLMs. According to Şenkal's research, this is the new frontier.
It's a huge departure from the math era.
Yeah, because instead of fixed mathematical rules, LLM-based agents operate through natural language reasoning.
Yeah.
They act as behaviorally rich proxies for actual human actors.
Which is... Wait, I need to push back on this a little bit because it sounds dangerously close to sci-fi. Wait, so instead of writing complex math equations, are planners basically just giving an AI a personality, some memories, and a daily schedule, and then letting it play a massive game of The Sims with the city grid?
Pretty much, yeah.
Are we really trusting multi-million-dollar infrastructure decisions to a chatbot's morning routine? I mean, it absolutely sounds like playing The Sims, but the methodology is incredibly robust. Lean into that analogy for a second. It is like The Sims, but instead of coding a digital character with a rigid rule like, go to the grocery store when the hunger bar is at 20%.
Right, which is just more math.
Exactly. Instead of that, you are using language to give the agent a complex context and an ongoing memory. Then you let the language model reason out the commute. Traditional models evaluate an isolated trip, like just home to work. But LLM agents simulate full daily activity patterns. Their decisions are dynamic.
Okay, walk me through what that actually looks like for a simulated citizen. Let's call her Agent Sarah. How does this reasoning play out in the actual model?
Okay, let's say Agent Sarah is prompted with a persona. She's a 30-something graphic designer who works downtown and prefers environmentally friendly transit.
Okay, got it.
So the model simulates her day. She needs to commute, but she also needs to pick up groceries on the way home. Now, if she takes the bus, she has to carry heavy bags for 6 blocks.
Oh, that's the worst.
Right, so the LLM processes that context and reasons. I prefer the bus, but carrying groceries today is too difficult, so I will drive.
And doesn't stop there, right?
Yep.
Because she has memory.
Exactly, she has
Yeah.
memory. Let's say she drives, and the simulation throws unexpected construction traffic at her on Fifth Avenue.
Okay.
The next simulated day, Agent Sarah remembers that friction. Her internal logic says, I drove yesterday, and traffic on Fifth was miserable. Today I'll order groceries online and take the bus to work.
Wow.
The AI is literally mimicking the internal monologue you have every morning when you grab your keys. And the beauty is, planners define all these constraints and scenarios using natural language instead of trying to write, thousands of lines of fragile code to represent annoyance at traffic.
But how does an AI's internal monologue actually become data that a city planner can use to, say, widen a road? Does the AI just output a diary entry like, Dear Diary, traffic sucked today?
Kind of. The LLM outputs text logs of its reasoning and spatial choices. The system then parses those logs and aggregates them into quantifiable flow metrics. Oh, I see.
Yeah, it translates the qualitative reasoning into quantitative traffic volumes. So you get the hard data of how many cars are on the road, but backed by a deep understanding of why they're there.
So what does this all mean? We have these incredibly smart, simulated AI humans generating text logs that turn into traffic data. How does this actually translate into changes in the physical streets, the public transit, and the neighborhoods that you and I interact with every day?
It changes a lot. The source material breaks down the impact into 4 connected areas.
Let's start with the first one, which is the link between behavior and physical space.
Right. So historically, it has been nearly impossible to link an individual's micro-decisions to macro-spatial dynamics. Traditional models treat travel as a function of aggregated variables like land use categories.
These big blocks of zoning.
Exactly. Tells you 1,000 people went downtown, but it completely obscures the underlying decision-making process of why they moved. Because if you know why they moved, you realize that maybe they didn't actually want to go downtown. Maybe they only went downtown because it's the only place with a decent daycare next to a subway station.
Precisely. LLM agents operate at the individual level. planners can finally simulate how daily activities, personal preferences, and specific constraints directly shape mobility patterns.
That's huge.
It gives planners a nuanced understanding of how land use and transportation actually interact. It allows them to see how micro-level decisions translate into macro-level spatial dynamics, meaning they can make informed decisions about zoning or where to place commercial hubs so the city actually serves the daily routines of the people living in it.
And this naturally brings us to the second major impact. If you finally understand why people are moving, the immediate next step is wanting to test new ideas to accommodate them. You want to test flexible scenarios.
Yes, scenario testing is critical.
Under the old system, if a city wanted to test a new policy, say, changing a bus schedule or adding a toll lane testing, that intervention meant months of heavy code recalibration.
It is incredibly resource-intensive. Adjusting mathematical rules slows the decision-making process to an absolute crawl. But with LLMs, we enter an era of highly flexible scenario testing. Planners can literally use natural language prompts to define alternative scenarios instantly.
So a city planner can sit down and type, hey, what happens to the downtown morning commute if we make the train free for students on Tuesdays? And the simulation just absorbs that new rule.
Essentially, yes. They can test new transit investments, pricing policies, or behavioral interventions without restructuring the entire underlying mathematical model.
That saves so much time.
In rapidly changing urban environments where, say, a new major employer might move in overnight or remote work trends suddenly shift, planners must be able to respond to uncertainty quickly.
But testing scenarios on tens of thousands of simulated people sounds incredibly heavy on computing power. Which brings me to a major question about the third point. Data efficiency.
Yes.
The cost. Right. The article claims this new method is more data efficient, but running large language models requires massive server power. Is a small town planning department really going to afford the AWS cloud computing bill to simulate 50,000 AI citizens every day?
It's a highly valid concern. I mean, computing costs are very real, but you have to weigh that against the cost of how data is gathered today. To run a traditional transportation model, cities rely on an origin-destination matrix.
Wait, let's define that. An origin-destination matrix is basically just a giant, incredibly expensive spreadsheet tracking where every single trip in a city starts and where it stops, right?
Yes, and building that spreadsheet requires massive detailed travel surveys and manual data collection. It costs an absolute fortune.
I can only imagine.
The extensive calibration processes are a massive barrier, particularly for resource-constrained municipalities. If you are a smaller city, you simply cannot afford millions of dollars to run sophisticated transportation models under the old framework.
I see. So the LLM changes the math on the budget. While the cloud compute might cost money, LLMs drastically reduce the need for that custom-collected survey data because they leverage pre-trained knowledge.
That is the key. The AI already has a foundational understanding of human context, reasoning, and logic built into it from its vast training data. It can fill in the behavioral gaps using its contextual reasoning capabilities.
So it already kind of knows how people generally act.
Exactly. So while you still need local baseline data, you don't need a multi-million-dollar survey. This effectively democratizes access to advanced modeling tools. The compute cost offsets the manual labor cost, meaning a small town's planning department can now perform sophisticated scenario analysis that used to be restricted to mega cities.
That makes a lot of sense. And frankly, relying on those massive broad surveys in the past brings up a huge flaw that leads right into the fourth impact: inclusive planning.
Right, the equity piece.
Because when you rely on broad surveys to save money, you inevitably end up generalizing. You create an average commuter.
Yeah.
But nobody is actually the average.
And that is the danger of the representative agent in traditional modeling. It inevitably masks the important differences between social groups. It erases the margins.
Exactly. An aggregate model assumes the average commuter is a statistical ghost driving a car from the suburbs to a 9-to-5 job downtown. But what about a single parent who works a night shift and has to drop kids off at 2 different locations using public transit before heading to a job outside the city center?
They get ignored by the math.
Right. You, me, the listener tuning in right now, none of us actually fit the exact mathematical average. The old models wash out our specific needs because they don't fit the curve.
And this is where simulating individual-level decision-making with LLMs is revolutionary. These agents capture behavioral diversity. A planner can prompt the system to represent specific income groups, varying age cohorts, or different lifestyle patterns.
So planners can actually see the real-world impact of a policy on vulnerable groups. If they cut a bus route, The LLM won't just show a tiny, statistically acceptable dip in overall aggregate efficiency. It will generate a text log showing exactly how that specific cut stranded a simulated night shift worker trying to get to daycare.
It makes the invisible visible. It pushes the field toward truly inclusive and equity-sensitive analysis. Planners can examine the distributional effects of a policy in vivid detail, ensuring that urban planning becomes a socially aware practice rather than just a cold engineering exercise.
I love that.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the integration of LLM-based agents is not just a software update. It is a fundamental shift in how planners interact with urban systems. It forces a pivot from viewing a city as merely a network of physical infrastructure to viewing it as a dynamic system centered entirely on the people who live in it.
It's moving from a focus on the concrete pipes to a focus on the complex, messy humans flowing through them. To summarize this deep dive, we are looking at a massive leap. We're transitioning away from a world where you and I are treated as predictable variables in a math equation.
Exactly.
Through large language models, city planners now have the tools to model cities directly around our actual needs, our daily routines, our memories, and our beautifully flawed lived experiences. It is prioritizing humanity over mere infrastructure.
It is a remarkable leap forward, but, as we move closer to models that perfectly capture our human nature, this raises an important call.
Oh boy. Lay it on me.
Well, bounded rationality means we make choices based on habits, stubbornness, and sometimes outright laziness. If these AI models become perfectly adept at capturing our most brilliantly irrational human behaviors, could future city planners end up designing infrastructure that actually caters to our worst, most inefficient habits simply because the simulation proves that's what we will inevitably do anyway?
Wow. Oh, that is a wild thought to end on. Are we going to build cities that just enable our worst impulses because the AI says we won't change our ways anyway? That is definitely something to chew on next time you were sitting in traffic, taking that irrational shortcut just to avoid a single left turn. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking at those city streets a little differently, and we will catch you on the next one.